Okay.
Well, Loretta, thank you so much for helping with my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I am a full-time freelance writer, and I write magazine articles and book reviews and occasionally books about human space exploration. And mostly I'm interested in its history, although part of history is looking forward. So I'm also interested in what's happening now.
And you also wrote a book about underground buildings.
I did. That was prior to my rebirth of my fascination with space flight. That was, I think that book was published in 2004, and about 2006 is when the world's first purpose-built commercial spaceport was beginning to be built and operate here in New Mexico. And that just caught my attention. You know, I think I was about 12 years old when the Mercury 7 astronauts were introduced to the country, and growing up in that era of getting men to the moon was just fantastic. And I've been a space buff ever since.
Well, actually, for some reason, I thought maybe it was tied into your love of space because, the need to protect us from radiation and everything means that we'll probably be underground. So trying to make those places
Yeah,
more attractive.
it really has been a nice symbiotic relationship since I shifted gears. But yeah, I'm still interested in underground structures, and especially now in other places other than Earth.
And I think you wrote a book also. I might get the title wrong, but it's like the 100 places for a space enthusiast to go visit.
Well, almost. It's called the Complete Space Buff's Bucket List: 100
Yes,
space things to do before you die. So, yes, and going to certain places is indeed part of that, and um, reading books and getting involved in various activities is also part of it. So there are all sorts of things to do.
that's awesome. I guess is there anything that you would add to that list now, considering what's happened since you've published it?
There are always new things happening. I have a, a web a website dedicated to that topic. It's spacebucketlist.com. And then I also have a page on Facebook that is devoted to my space topics, but in particular, I list new things that are coming up, and there are new opportunities all the time. And one of the things that I say in the book is that it's the list of 100 things is there, but it's flexible. You know, if there's something you don't want to do on there, you know, for example, one of the ones that I included on the list but didn't really want to do myself was learn to speak Klingon. It just seemed like too big an effort for me, and I had enough trouble trying to learn how to speak German. So so you can substitute something else for an item on the bucket list if you want to do something different. And so I keep making people aware of new opportunities as they come up.
That's pretty awesome. I haven't checked. I need to check out the website, but is there a way to say I did this or?
Well, there's checklist in the book that you can check things off, or you know, you can. I don't think I have the full list printed on the website, but sure, you can keep your own list and you know check things off as you do them. I think I've checked off 61 things now. Still
That's
a ways to go.
that's awesome. Yeah. Well, when did you find out that we were going to the moon in 2024?
Oh gosh, I don't think I can pinpoint a specific time. I'm always keeping up with what's happening in the space world. So you know, I've been aware of it for a while now, and I hope we get there in that time frame. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I mean, you had Blue Origin's or the national team deliver their full-scale mock-up to Johnson Space Center a few weeks ago, and today
Right.
you had Dianetics in Huntsville, Alabama, unveiling their sort of full-scale mock-up. So you definitely for the human landing system. So that's, you're actually seeing real stuff happen. It's kind of,
Yeah, it's getting exciting again. That's one of the things that helped me get enthused about continuing to write about space topics for the last dozen years or so. That there's, especially with the development of the commercial space industry, there's more of the excitement again that we felt back in the Apollo era, and we haven't felt that level of excitement for a while. So I'm really thrilled to see that.
yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I was born the same year as Jim Bridenstine, the current NASA administrator, and we
Uh-huh.
both have in common that we missed the last Apollo flight by 3 years.
Oh,
Uh, so I have to kind of imagine what it was like during the Apollo time. But I almost feel like that during the Apollo time, maybe the focus and enthusiasm is a lot more uh, focused because there was only one program and the way we got our news then. Whereas now, like the excitement and enthusiasm is really dispersed across many different projects and many different programs, and not as many people know about them.
I
As,
think that's very true. I had someone ask me not too long ago, why are we going back to the moon? We've been there, done that. Yeah, you're right. There was a lot more focus on the news. We had three major news television networks at the time, plus the PBS. And yeah, it was much more focused, and there were live broadcasts all the time of whatever the human launches were going on. And of course, that had grown out of the Cold War era. And I still have not come up with a good way to convey to younger people what it was like to live in that Cold War atmosphere. And it was a very real thing. I mean, by the time we were actually sending men to the moon on our Apollo project, the Soviets had kind of, I guess, basically given up on sending men to the moon at that time. Clearly, we were going to get there before they were, and that it, that that aspect of the motivation and the feeling had kind of dissipated by then. But yeah, it was an amazing period of history.
yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about changes from that time period to now. I think it was what, 92 was whenever the Berlin Wall came down.
I think that's about right. Yeah.
And I mean, there was a point where you could not fly to, Poland or to, uh, Germany was split into two countries, and you couldn't fly to Ukraine, and you couldn't go over to Russia, and now all those places are just part of the world system.
Right.
It's
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a very intense competition during the Kennedy Khrushchev era of really seeking world domination in terms of the ideology of the two different communism versus capitalism. And there was a real attempt to, um, well, it was a question of world domination of the ideology. So it was intense.
yeah, and some people are feeling that maybe the USSR has been replaced by the conflict with China. I was wondering how you might think that's different or the same. I mean, like, how does that
Well,
feel?
personally, it strikes me as being somewhat similar. When I see China's plans to go to the moon, to put people on the moon, um, it it brings back a similar feeling of what I had in that era. I mean, they're not pounding the table like Khrushchev used to do, but given some of the things we've seen, the way they appropriate our intellectual property sometimes, and aren't completely truthful or open with some of their programs, it gives me a little bit of pause and makes me wonder, if they get there, what are they going to do? Are they going to try and stake out a claim to part of it? You know, that's that I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist because I'm not really, but maybe having grown up in that Cold War era, it just makes me a little suspicious.
But one big difference is I don't think, I mean, how many Soviet products were actually imported into the United States during that time and that we depended on?
No, no, it was a very different era for sure.
I know it seems we're in a lot more vulnerable position in some ways.
That's right. And it is also interesting that in that time period, there was this intense competition at the political level, but as time went on and our astronauts managed to interact with their cosmonauts some, there was not that kind of competition between them. As people, they were interested in space exploration, and they got along well together. It was the difference between the personal level and the broad level.
Yeah, but isn't that kind of true pretty much across the world and what have you? I mean, I went to go watch a play in Minneapolis before the whole lockdown and thing. I think it was like January or February. And it was something about the, you know, during World War One, whenever there was like that time when the both sides were actually had like their Christmas
Mm,
time and they were just playing and really it's I mean, I just feel like all my interactions, I've talked to people in Pakistan and India and Saudi Arabia and what have you. And, you know, I think at the fundamental level, people just want to live their lives. They're, you know,
yeah,
you give them a house, give them a job, you know, make sure that their daily life isn't that is as violence free as possible. And I think that's pretty much what 99% of the people in the world want.
yeah, I agree completely. Yeah.
But then you have these institutions like governments that are into like domination and you know it's just it just it seems like at some point we might come to realize that maybe governments are their own separate thing and they're not quite um, serving the needs that we need.
Yeah, I hope we get there sometime.
Mm. Um, so out of like the 260 plus interviews that I've done so far, I would say only about 50 of the people knew that we were going back to the moon in 2024.
Hmm,
In fact, some people thought the program was discontinued, you know, and that NASA wasn't doing anything. Some are like thinking that NASA's keeping it a secret, you know, and why are they being so secretive about it? You know, a lot of this speaks to the way that we get our news is, you know, very much targeted not necessarily to our interest, but to the way the platforms think our interests are. And so they kind of
mhm.
like create this reinforcing bubble. As a writer who's writing about space concepts, do you have any techniques that you've been using to try to kind of pierce through and across those bubbles? And what does that look like?
Well, it's somewhat difficult with my formal writing because naturally the magazines or whatever publications want space related stories are being read by people who are already interested in space. So mostly what I do is in different organizations that I'm involved with, like I'm a board member for the New Mexico Press Women, which is an affiliate of the National Federation of Press Women. I'm also a member of some writers groups. And so within those groups, I try and, you know, make them a little bit more aware of the importance and the excitement of space exploration. And then like just on my Facebook page, I'll post or repost space related topics to sort of let let the people who get uh, feeds from me become a little bit more aware. It's kind of a person to person networking, I guess.
Yeah, I know. I try to wear my NASA shirts as much as I can. Yes, you know. So while I'm jogging, I'm like the human billboard. Maybe
Yes.
subliminally, people are. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult thing. Do you think if people knew that we're going back to the moon, that would help strengthen support for the program? Or do you think people would be questioning, why are we doing that when we have, COVID-19 and poverty and things? I mean, like, how do you feel people would go with it?
It probably would be a mixture of the two, just like it was back in the Apollo era. People tend to think there was this massive groundswell of public support for getting men to the moon back in the 60s. And the fact of the matter is that only at any given time, only about half of the American people were in favor of it, largely for the reasons you just mentioned. We have poverty here on Earth. We have all these problems that we need to solve. Why are we putting money into sending people to the moon? So human nature being what it is, I think the reactions would probably be similar.
Yeah, my dad often tells me that if we spend as much money going to the moon as we did here, we can make this place a paradise. And so I've kind of
Well,
probed that.
that
I'm like, this is so many $1 billion. How would you spend it? And we're spending more on like nuclear weapons, which are meant to destroy the world. So
right. Well, and I think another thing that most people have no clue about is the fact that the NASA's budget accounts for about 0.5% of the national budget at any time, and it hasn't changed much. I mean, during the Apollo era, it was slightly higher than that, but I don't think it was above 1%. And even now, yes, we're talking billions of dollars, but compared to the rest of the budget, it's a tiny amount, and yet the payoffs from it are huge. We get the spilloff benefits, the things that we learn from long-term stays on the International Space Station, what happens to the human body and how we can counteract some of those efforts. Those are helping people here on Earth who have physical problems along those same lines. And I mean, that's just one tiny example. So it's not like the money is just being poured into that for no particular purpose, except the excitement of exploration. There are real benefits involved. I'm talking to the choir, I know.
I know, but yeah, I definitely agree that there's like benefits at least, but I think it's really difficult to like enumerate those benefits or
It
to
is.
um I mean, people know about Tang and Velcro and and pins that write upside down, and they're like that doesn't quite do it for me. So I was wondering if
Yeah.
there's like some benefits that stood out in your mind that are worth making people aware of.
Well, I think the health related benefits, as I just alluded to, are the ones that I find most impressive and useful. And it is a very difficult thing to convey to people. I think at least I think once a year NASA puts out a publication about the important spin-offs that have occurred during the past year, and it's people don't have access to that. People, unless you're tuned into NASA to begin with, um, and a lot of it is it's special needs sorts of things that people just aren't aware of unless they happen to have, say, a physical problem that this new technology can address. But that's the spin-offs are one aspect of the benefits of it. Where there are other aspects too of just the pure science and what we're learning about planetary formation and all of those kinds of things, and the psychological aspects of how people react to long-term space flight. It's very broad, and it's hard to convey all of that to people. It's such a huge field.
I often think if you just look at the way we get water, you have uh, you know the you have the water from the oceans that become like clouds, and they go over the sea, over the land. Then rain comes down, and then you get into lakes, and then you have pipes from the lakes. Then it gets refined. Then it gets pumped to all the houses. Then it gets used. Then it gets put in sewers. Then treatment plants, and then essentially it goes into like places where it runs off to the sea again to begin the whole
Right,
process. So
right.
uh, like that loop is probably, hundreds of miles for each water molecule, you know, and a lot of energy is used during that time. And, I mean, ideally, you would like to be able to maybe get that down to like a house or a street or a community where you're able to essentially maybe you go and get 100 gallons once a year to like top off any waste. But other than that, it's just going in a cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are some of the other kinds of benefits that we're getting from studying, closed environment system like the International Space Station, or like eventual long-term living on the moon or going to Mars. We're going to have to do that kind of recycling and reusing. That's the only way we're going to survive. And of course, those kinds of benefits can be used to help things here on Earth too, and use our resources more intelligently here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a big development cost, and then there's a big, then once you got something developed, mass producing it becomes a lot cheaper. So
Right,
we could kind of use NASA to pay for the development cost and kind of create things we didn't even know we needed.
right.
So whenever you think about the future of humanity, like looking out 500 years, um, what kind of trajectory do you think we're on? Like, if you were to see humanity 500 years from now, do you think we're still just like on the Earth making these little side trips to places, or have you really expanded the sphere of humanity beyond the Earth?
Well, I'm not sure I can say what I expect, but what I hope is that we will be continuing to evolve into more of an interplanetary species. Um, it's the idea of intelligent life existing in other places of the universe is an exciting thing, and I hope it's out there. But I saw something just recently that indicates that we've been searching fairly rigorously, and in some ways increasingly rigorously, for quite a while now to try and find that, and we're not finding any signs of that. So um, you know we're pretty special. Our species is pretty special, and I would like to see it be able to survive. And whether in the ultra long term we can continue to survive just here on Earth is a big question mark.
Yeah, and what do you see as the biggest threat to our survival here on Earth?
Well, climate change is going to be a problem, and our species or our forebears have adapted to climate change at various times in the past. But if we are causing the climate change, then it throws a wrinkle into that adaptation cycle. And so that, I think, is one challenge. And another type of threat, I think, is and some sort of impact from an asteroid or something of that type. That we have evidence that there were major impacts in far history here on Earth, and there's no reason to think that that couldn't happen again. And it could have severe consequences. So that's another aspect of the space programs, of course, is that we're trying to figure out how to keep that from happening, which will be a great benefit to all of us if we can manage that. But it is a significant threat. When I was growing up, we learned that space was a vacuum. There's nothing out there. Well, there are stars, but in between the stars, there's nothing. Well, we now know that's not true. There's all sorts of tiny to large particles flying around all out there. So it's interesting to watch the level of knowledge increase over time.
Yeah, I saw something that Earth's atmospherical particles, while very, very far apart, have been detected even as far as the orbit of the moon, you know,
Hmm.
so
Yeah,
you
maybe
know,
causing rust on the moon.
yeah, there's that too. Uh, yeah, and if it was safe and affordable, would you take a trip to space?
Mhm.
And would this be like a suborbital trip or a week in orbit or a couple of weeks to the moon or a couple of year journey to Mars and back?
Well, that's easy for me to say right now because that's probably not going to be available. Most of those options won't be available in the rest of the time that I have here on Earth because I'm I'm not a spring chicken anymore. Um, Suborbital, definitely. I mean, I had the opportunity at one time to spend 2 days at the NASTAR Center in Pennsylvania. That's the National Aerospace Training and Research Center, and I did a 2 day experience of um, preparing for and riding the centrifuge in a simulated Virgin Galactic suborbital trip. And it was fantastic. It was just amazing. So yeah, I'd love to do that and for real. But the idea of me being able to go for a week in orbit, well, maybe by the time I'm 90, it might happen.
Well, and I mean, the Starship, they're making phenomenal progress on that. I remember going down to Boca Chica, Texas last September, and they only had like maybe one or two buildings there, and now they have like a huge complex building out, you know, a Starship every couple of weeks. And, they're talking about doing that, 12-kilometer um, of or a 1.2 thousand meter flight sometime in like the next week or two, and actually, sending people around the moon in 2023 and to Mars, and are sending a ship to Mars in 2024. I know it's all Elon time and all that, but
Yeah. Yeah, but it is exciting. It's terribly exciting, and with the commercial industry doing that now, separate from or in cooperation with the NASA and the government programs, it that's part of what's making it exciting. We don't have to fully depend on Congress anymore and their whims of, well, this term we'll support space exploration and next term we want to cut it back. But with some of the commercial industries now, it, a more consistent effort.
yeah, and I mean, and Blue Origin's funding model, you can't beat that.
Yeah, yeah,
Jeff Bezos selling a few $1 billion of his shares a year to fund it.
right. Well, they're planning on suborbital flights too in the fairly near future, and theirs will be a very different experience from Virgin Galactic's. You know, Virgin Galactic's is a horizontal takeoff and landing approach, and Blue Origins is going to be, rocket launch like the old Apollo days. So there are going to be options available there too.
And the Blue Origin one actually seems greener since they're using hydrogen and oxygen. They just,
Well, so does Virgin Galactic in its spaceship. It's
oh,
the
okay.
mothership uses jet fuel, but the spaceship itself uses a hybrid fuel technology.
Oh, okay. And I was also another option, not quite space, but gives you like the option of it, and it's like the slowest leisurely journey.
Oh,
About Jane Poynter and Tabor McAuliffe. That's like the space perspective.
worldview. Yeah,
Right. They're having,
yeah.
well,
I'd like to try that too.
yeah, and they're talking about doing a test flight early next year with like nobody inside, and then
Mhm.
offering flights in like 3 or 4 years from now. And I think it's like kind of like a 6-hour journey. Like
Yeah.
it only, and anyway, it should be kind of neat.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So, but um, well, I kind of envision this project as a resource for children yet unborn. Kind of like I'm envisioning like a high schooler that lived on the moon having to do a research project for what were people thinking before the new space age started. And the a big milestone that I think is our return to the moon. And I was just curious in what you might like for that high school student doing that report to kind of know about life here on Earth at this time and what we're thinking and where we're going.
Well, I tend to think that humanity itself is not going to change fundamentally in some basic ways. And so I expect that that student will feel the same type of fascination with exploring the unknown as what we feel now. And that we have always been that way as human beings. So that there's a distinct distance, if you will, in terms of technology, of like that person living on the moon, and we don't know how to do that yet. But there's also that continuum of the humanity and the human experience that um, we're basically the same.
Do you think they'll be dreaming of visiting Earth?
Quite possibly. They'll be in for a big shock when they experience the gravity.
They might have to spend weeks and weeks in those centrifuges. You're building up the
Right,
strength. So,
right.
well, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Well, I just mentioning the history of human spaceflight. One of the things that I have been interested in naturally, since I'm a woman, is the history of women in space. And the right now with the Artemis project, you know, we're being told we're going to put the first woman on the moon and the next man on the moon. And it just seems like, you know, during, and this has all been within my lifetime, this whole beginnings of human space flight. And it took us a long time to get the first women into space. And and yet, you know, here we are 50 years later, and it's still a novelty. And I think, you know, I hope before too long we'll get over the novelty of it and just realize that we're all people. You know, one of the, I give a lot of talks about space topics, and one of the talks that I give is called Venus and Mars, the space travel differences for men and women. And there are many similarities. There are some differences, and there are certain ways in which women experience space flight less problematically than men do. And there are some ways that men experience it less problematically than women do. But I guess I feel a lot like what Sally Ride said when somebody asked her. I mean, she was before her first female American space flight. People were asking her all these gender-related questions, and finally she said, "You know, it's too bad that our society hasn't progressed any farther than this, and this is such a big deal." And I guess that's the way I'm feeling too. You know, it's nice to see women making that progress, but one of these days I hope it's no big deal anymore.
I know you had like the first flight director, and last year you had the first all-woman spacewalk, and I
Yeah,
remember one of the astronauts talking about what that event was like, and she's like, I'm really honored to be part of it, but the same token, I'm glad we're past it, and now it's just like, and now
yeah,
we could just be people in space.
yeah. And you know, the women who have set those benchmarks along the way, I don't think there's been a single one, certainly not a one that I'm aware of, who has done it as a feminist type movement. They've done it because that was the work they wanted to do. And it just so happened they were a woman doing it. And that's, I think that's part of the reason that they become frustrated when people make an issue of it. That it's just, you know, you're a guy, you want to do certain things. I'm a woman, I like to do certain things. What's the difference?
I know it's on the other side of it, you have like guys that are like, I just want to stay home with the kids, you know.
Oh, yes, yes, that's right. That's right.
That's not a
Anytime it
manly
goes,
thing to do.
yeah, anytime it goes against the norm, it's questioned. Yeah. But I do want to mention briefly that part of the reason that I got interested in this was that I got to know a woman named Wally Funk. And she was one of the Mercury 13. So she was one of the 13 women who passed the same physical exams that the Mercury astronaut candidates passed. And Wally is just an amazing person. She is still trying to get into space. She has a ticket on Virgin Galactic and she's waiting for her number to come up.
That's
But
awesome.
I've helped Wally write her memoir, and this is almost ready. We're doing the final proof copy readings right now. So she has an amazing story about continuing to actively pursue space flight since 1961. But while she was doing that, she didn't let it interfere with the rest of her life either. And she became the first woman FAA inspector and the first woman National Transportation Safety Board aviation accident investigator. And she has done tremendous work in aviation and teaching air pilot safety and those sorts of things. So I think she's just a great role model for a lot of people. So I wanted to give her a little promo there.
That's awesome. When's the book gonna be available to buy?
It should be just a matter of a couple of weeks from now. And it's kind of funny because if you go to Amazon right now, you'll see that it's available. But what's available is basically it's the proof copy. There are
Okay.
still some corrections that need to be done on it. And it doesn't normally happen that way, that the proof copies show up on Amazon, but because of the COVID thing and to expedite us getting our proof copies as quickly as possible, we've had to do it that way. So if you see it on Amazon, don't order it yet. there's one more iteration of editing still to be done. But we have a website called wallyfly.com. And I will be posting on there when it's live in final form. And if anybody who happens to watch this broadcast, if they want to have an email sent to them and let them know when it's available, they can just go to wallyfly.com and fill out the contact form there, and I'll send them an email as soon as it's ready.
Wow. I wonder if the people at Virgin Galactic know who she is.
Oh yeah,
Like,
they do.
okay, and then she's like, it seems like that would be a big promotional opportunity for them that
Well,
they could take advantage of.
they have used her, in publicity so far, but you know, they're still going by the numbers of what number ticket she has, and when it's her turn, she'll get to go.
Oh, wow. So we just need to hurry up and get them flying as fast as possible.
Exactly.
So make
Well, they're
everybody
planning,
happy.
yeah, well, they're planning their first powered flight from Spaceport America in New Mexico within the next month or so, I think. So they're definitely making progress, and hopefully they'll get real flights started next year.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for mentioning that to me. I'll definitely add a note about wallyfly.com
Thank
and
you.
that.
Appreciate
So
that.
I was mentioning to a high schooler girl about they're gonna send the first woman and the next man, and she's like, "What is it? Like they're dating or something?" It's like so. She was really baffled. So, but
Yeah,
it does kind of have that sound to it.
it does.
Uh, so
Oh,
anyway, well, thank you so much for your time, and I look
thank
forward to
you for
reading your
having me
book.
on.
Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah.
and I guess I'll talk to you later then.
Okay, thanks a lot, Nathan. Thanks for doing this.
You bet. Thank you for participating.
You bet.
Bye bye.
Bye.